Hello, listeners. Hello, video viewers. Welcome to the podcast. Very nice to have you with me again. Now, as you know, in episodes of my podcast, I often talk about language learning, and I often teach you specific things like vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation, especially in the premium episodes, of course. But also on the podcast, I do episodes which are not specifically about the English language or about learning or teaching English. I also like to present you with things that I hope are simply interesting to listen to, or episodes which focus on culture rather than language. And this episode is one of those. This is a conversation which focuses on British culture and art. And it's an interview about an artistic movement which took place in England in the 1970s. So it's not about English, but it's all in English, of course. And I'm presenting it to you as part of your regular English listening practice. So this is an interview with artist, illustrator, and author Penny Dale, who was one of the members of the Bath Arts Workshop, which is the artistic movement that I'll be talking about with Penny today. So let me give you some context just to explain how this interview was set up. And this will not take 15 minutes, I promise. So first of all, there's a new book available and it's just been published. It's called Bath Arts Workshop, Counterculture in the 1970s. And as the title suggests, it's all about a counterculture arts movement which took place in the southwest of England in the 1970s. We'll explain what a counterculture arts movement means in a few minutes. One of the people involved in that artistic movement and also involved in the publishing of this new book is Penny Dale. Penny is an illustrator and also an author of children's books, an award-winning author, I might add. She's illustrated and written some very popular kids' books in the UK, and we have a lot of them at home here. My daughter loves them. We read them all the time. But back in the 1970s, Penny hadn't begun that part of her career yet and was involved in this conceptual and subversive arts movement, the Bath Arts Workshop. Penny is a friend of the family. She's a very good friend of my mum and dad. And in fact, it was my mum who suggested that Penny could be a good person for me to interview, and that both the Bath Arts Workshop and her career as a children's author would be interesting things to talk about. So that's the plan. This will be two separate episodes, I think. This one about the arts movement, and then another one about the writing of children's books. So that'll be part one and part two. This is part one, of course, so let's focus on the Bath Arts Workshop. And by the way, listeners, Bath is a town in the southwest of England, right? We're not talking about bathtubs where you go to wash yourself and play with little yellow rubber ducks and boats and things. No. So this isn't an art movement that involved people sitting in bathtubs or anything. But then again, it was the 1970s, so that isn't completely far-fetched. Anything's possible. Okay, so that's probably enough of an introduction from me. Let's now meet Penny and start the interview properly. So, hi Penny, how are you today?
Hi Luke, how are you? Looking good.
Fine, thanks. Except feeling slightly frazzled.
Oh,
That's an interesting word.
yes.
What's frazzled? Just slightly tired.
Frayed and tired and a bit distracted.
Yeah, just like a bit tired because yesterday at the weekend we went. Had a weekend away in the countryside, and that involved driving. And then we drove back, yesterday late afternoon. And it was supposed to be a 2.5 hour trip. And when you're using GPS or satellite navigation in your car, and
Yes.
the estimated time of arrival just keeps changing.
Getting longer, yes.
Yeah, so we were like 45 minutes away from home for about 2 hours is what it felt like.
Oh dear.
So it was a long car journey yesterday, so I'm feeling a bit frazzled, but I'm fine. How about you?
Yeah, more or less awake, I think, now. Yes, also had a really busy weekend as well. So I think I'm ready to try and sum up what the counterculture was, but it's not an easy ask. So
Yeah.
we'll have a go.
Yes, we'll give it a good shot. So yeah, let's talk about the Bath Arts Workshop. Let's go back to the 1970s in Bath, the southwest of England, a counterculture arts movement. Maybe we can start with that. What does that mean then, a counterculture art movement? I think we know what the culture part means,
Mm.
but what about the counter part?
Hmm.
What is a counterculture movement? What do we mean by counterculture?
Well, I think it's an expression that maybe even started in America. I don't know, but it was around, the time of Woodstock, um, and also in London. Arts. There was an arts lab in Drury Lane in London, so there was a movement. It wasn't really the hippie movement. It was more a kind of came out of that, and was. Um, People taking a position where they were saying there was a different way to do things than all out capitalism. There was a way that the arts could be used in a more kindly and productive way, with more people being included. So I think it was a movement about inclusion and countering the sort of elitism of a lot of art. So a lot of,
Yes.
classical music gallery going, and we're talking about Bath, the place, not the Bath, is a town in Somerset in England, and it became a kind of a hub for alternative, which is another word for this kind of culture and movement. So alternative technology as well as art. There just were lots of young people at the time. I think that it was the first time since the war generation, or the First and Second World War, that our parents were part of, were looking for an alternative and had time and an environment where they could experiment more. So there wasn't such a pressure to. It was possible to rent really cheap flats and things, and you could live. Students had grants that they didn't have to pay back. There was just time and breathing space then to think of other ways of doing things. So yeah, that's
So the
kind of.
counterculture part, as you said, is more about trying to a movement that was sort of critical of the general current culture, especially in art, which, as you said, was
Yeah.
quite elitist, and it was all about changing the general culture and finding ways of introducing new ideas that perhaps were critical of the current state of affairs, and doing
Yes,
this in inventive ways.
that's
Um,
right. And just setting up um, actual physical spaces where everybody could join in. That was the sort of ethos. It was open to everyone, not expensive, accessible. Yes, inclusivity was the thing, and there were various all over this country and all over Europe and USA, all sorts of places. Young people were having these ideas, and movements were starting. So the workshop in Bath was just one. I encountered it early on, and it had sprung out of the London Arts Lab. Phil Shepherd, who was in the London Arts Lab, hitchhiked to Bath and had these ideas about wanting to do something like that in another place. And he'd written letters to councils all over the UK saying, can we start an arts lab where all sorts of people can come and try all sorts of things, from theatre and film and music. And, he just put this letter out, and in fact got a response from the council in Bath. It was probably the only one.
Hello, viewers and listeners. I hope that you're enjoying this conversation. You just heard Penny there mention Phil Shepherd, who was one of the founding members of the Bath Arts Workshop. And after this conversation, Penny suggested that I might like to include a short video clip of Phil himself describing counterculture and explaining what counterculture means, because he does it in a very clear and concise way. So this is Phil Shepherd describing the counterculture, and this was recorded on video by Richard Wyatt, and the credit for this little clip goes to bathmuseum.com. But this is Phil Shepherd, founder of the Bath Arts Workshop, explaining what counterculture means.
What exactly was the Arts Workshop? We hear a lot about counterculture. Can you explain?
What the counterculture was? Yeah, well, I think the counterculture was a kind of reaction to, I would go as far as to say it was young people predominantly saying the kind of world that's being built in the shadow of the world wars, which was very, very prominent in those days, as you may remember, was not the kind of world they wanted, we wanted. We didn't kind of particularly see this kind of drive for materialism and prosperity and a kind of competitive environment as one that promised very much for us, I sense. So we were looking for alternatives. So to me, the counterculture came from a kind of deep, unconscious yearning for something different. And it manifests in a lot of different ways. At its heart, I think it was about compassion and kindness and collectivism and people working together. A thing about freedom that wasn't just about this notion of individual freedom, I'm all right, Jack, but actually freedom being a collective thing. But connectedness, I suppose, being connected to other people and connected to nature.
And Bath's a medium-sized, fairly touristy now city, but full of architecture, incredible Georgian architecture. So it's quite a special place, or a particular place. And it had a very classical festival there that used to go on every year with classical concerts and opera and literary stuff. So what Phil was wanting to start off, he and a friend called Abel came to Bath and just began, people coalesced really quickly, like there was a sort of specific gravity that attracted people. And within, a few months, a first building had been found, and they were putting on sort of mini festivals in the parks of Bath, with music and poetry and loads of kids and inflatables, and all this stuff happened really quite quickly. So there was a big appetite for it. And then the workshop became established as it had some premises, and, lots of people became full-time, and some finance was eventually achieved to keep it going, some grants and things from the Arts Council. But it started very small and became really quite a magnet for theatre and all sorts of other arts.
How did you actually get involved in it then?
Well, I moved to Bath when I was 16, and I was halfway through my sixth form, which is, the final year of school or high school in the States. So I was 16 when I moved to Bath, 15, 16, and was wandering around this amazing city thinking, because I'd grown up in Devon, which was a very deep countryside, really, in a tiny school and small grammar school I went to. So Bath was like a really big deal, and I didn't know anyone. And my friend and I were there in the summer holidays before I was due to go and start a foundation course in art. And she and I were at a music event in the park that we didn't realise was organised by Bath Arts Workshop. So we were at this kind of like a pop festival. Hawkwind were there, and some poets, and Jeremy Fry's grounds, I think. So there was this wonderful event we were at. Then it rained, and we went back down into the town where Bath Arts Workshop had taken over 3 huge Georgian buildings in Great Pulteney Street, which is a big, wide kind of boulevard, which they'd been loaned by a really amazing guy who was a millionaire. He was a millionaire, but was completely probably like a socialist millionaire. So he'd made some money in London in property, and then he came to Bath. He bought 3 hotels. He bought the Theatre Royal. He had like helicopters and things, and he said, you can have a helicopter for your pop group to the workshop, you can have my hotel I've just bought, this huge 3 buildings, and have it for your festival, fine. And so they'd taken over. So my friend and I came into this street. We were guided because this first event had been rained off. And there was just the sound of incredible like pop music and stuff coming out of this hotel that was sort of pulsing and all lit up. And inside was all sorts of theatre groups, and Hawkwind again were playing there. There was a kids' theatre group. There were theatre companies from all over, alternative theatre companies in different rooms. There were an exhibition on the top floor, an upside down room, a room painted like blue with sky all around. I mean, it was just a kind of alternative heaven. Culturally, it was like completely different to the Bath Festival. So we encountered this incredible event before we knew exactly what the workshop were, right? And then roll on a couple of months, I met with the same friend, I met a couple of people from the workshop at another outdoor event, and we just got talking to them, and just it felt like we were all from the same tribe. So very quickly, I, not my friend, got involved with the workshop and said, can I help? And that was how I found out what they really did and how they worked.
Okay. And so what sort of things did you do then when you started working with them?
Well, at first, I just went along to help with one gig, which was basically the workshop had several kind of departments. So there were about 12 full-time people. There was a little shop where they sold handmade things and stuff to raise some money. There was an office of sorts where things were organised, and there was a touring theatre company. There was a pastiche rock and roll group called Rocky Ricketts and the Jet Pilots of Jive with the Rockettes that did quite a lot of gigs around the area and all over the place. There was a community transport thing that helped people with the removals and things, people that couldn't afford. There was an adventure playground, just loads of different sort of activities in the community. So I went along to a gig just to help with props and costumes ostensibly. And it was an eye-popping experience.
Why?
Because, well, the Rocky Ricketts, I can show you a picture here. I'm just
So
going
the Rocky Ricketts are a band, right? You said they were a pastiche, so they're kind of a comedy band?
Yes,
or
kind of a comedy band. So I can actually just, I mean, it's so complicated to kind of cover all the different things that the workshop did. So anyway, this one thing.
Don't worry, we can't cover everything, but we you know, we can't. It's all in the book anyway. But we can kind of just sort of give your side of the story. Yes. So this is the chapter. Penny, listeners, at the moment, Penny is holding up a copy of the book, and this is chapter 5, the Rocky Ricketts Show. And the dates here, listeners, this was like 1972 to 1978. So I guess you joined the group, right? It's not Rocky Ricketts, but you joined the workshop. Maybe a couple of years after they first started. So you came in sort of like 71, 72, something like that.
That's right. Yeah, that. So they were getting pretty established, and they knew what they were doing, and I was trying to find out. So I ended up joining in sort of part-time while I was about to start this foundation course in Bristol at Art College. But all that summer I went on gigs with them. So I went to, this first one was with the Rocky Ricketts Pastiche Show. So Rocky Ricketts is was a really young bloke who was playing an aging rock star. And so he actually... I could read you a little bit, actually, that
go ahead,
explains what it was like. So an aging 50s rock star made a comeback with a rock and roll band and his fabulous Rockettes. And Vince Pube, who was the manager.
Vince Pube.
Yeah. Threw raffle prizes at the audience. And the finale was Gloria, featuring Rocky's surreal liberation rap. Make of it what you will. That's the introduction to the chapter. So Brian, who played Rocky Ricketts, and that's him with the band there. I'm showing a picture of him with the band sitting around in their green room, and that's Vince leaning on the door. So Brian says, the premise was simple. Rocky, now past the first flush of youth, was having yet another comeback. In the fallow times between the peaks and troughs in rock and roll, he was forced back into his day job as a greengrocer in South Acton, a fantasy based on the real-life shop next door to where I was born. Most of Rocky's backstory was based around my own. He'd seen the green-haired rocker Willie Wee Harris at the Chiswick Empire, something that I, aged 10, had done. He lived in a council house, as I had done. In fact, Rocky was a version of me writ larger than life. So Brian was a really amazing singer and performer, and the band were very good. So they played things like Blue Suede Shoes and stuff like that. And the Rockettes were kind of, again, pastiche backing singers, but sung really well and in tune and everything. So it was a really tight outfit and could support a band like the one that I encountered on my first gig with them. So I went with them to this small town hall in Chippenham, which is a town near to Bath. And we turned up and went into these sort of concrete floored dressing rooms at the back of the thing to get ready to do the Rocky show. And across the way, another group were warming up that we hadn't heard of, and they were the main act. So we looked across and we could see these amazing looking people with very glittery clothes, almost as glittery as the ones we had, if not more so. And one of them had like T-strainer eyepieces on. And
What,
another
like,
had like Phil Manzanera, I think, had
what, like kind of glasses?
like T-strainers, like an insect, like insect eye.
Right. So tea strain is like those metal sort of sieves that you use to strain loose
Strain
leaf tea.
tea if you're not.
So he's got one of them on each eye. So he looks like an
That's right.
insect or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, he looked like an insect. Very, very shiny clothes. Another one had a big sort of like ironed sheets of blonde hair, really long hair. It was Eno.
Brian Eno. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it turned out that this band across the way from us was Roxy Music on their first tour. So we weren't majorly impressed because we didn't yet know what Roxy Music was going to become. So and they were amazing. We sort of became fans quite quickly.
I don't know, listeners, if it might be necessary to just flag up the fact that, Roxy Music, I don't know if everyone out there has heard of them, but certainly in the UK's music scene, they are one of the big groups, one of the big influential bands, and amazing. I don't know what, they're not really glam rock. I think it's art rock. I think that's technically how to describe them and their music. Art rock, this kind of weird sort of avant-garde, glamorous group with crazy outfits and an amazing sense of
crazy
style.
Outfits, kind of 1930s sort of pastiche. We were doing a 1950s pastiche of rock and roll, and they were kind of, it was almost Art Deco and sort of very, very sharp hair, all very, very pointed hairstyles and things. Brian Ferry had almost a quiff, didn't he? And padded shoulders, pointy. It was just an incredible look. And they also had the very first, what was that great synthesizer that Brian Eno had?
Was it a
big
Moog
synthesizer, yes.
Maybe a Moog synthesizer or something. But if you see videos of them performing, there are a few famous performances by Roxy Music on Top of the Pops. And you see Brian Eno. There's guys with guitars and stuff, pretty conventional. And then there's Brian Eno, and he's essentially got what looks like one of those old-fashioned computers. I mean, it probably was.
Yes, it was.
A big board with lots of knobs and switches and flashing lights and things on it. And it's like, what on earth is he doing with?
That's right, and turning knobs and getting these incredible sort of really weird sounds and that no one had heard before, but integrated into incredible songs. Yeah. So sorry, I'm being a bit of a fangirl now.
Oh yeah, well of course it's Roxy Music.
Yes.
But so you sort of brushed shoulders with the likes of Roxy Music then. And
I mean that was a real high point. I don't think that was ever exceeded. That was probably the most famous group I ever kind of was in a next dressing room to. But later on, we were organising all sorts of festivals that included music and theatre. So, we would organise a festival every year. There was a really big summer festival, sometimes on more than one site in the city that the workshop organised. So there would be performances in several venues quite often, some conventional and some, one year we had domes. We made domes out of scaffolding. The first kind of geodesic domes covered with
Yeah.
like Melanex as a venue, and had a big exhibition of alternative community technology. It was called. First windmills, solar panels, and stuff like that. So groups would come from all over Europe, really, and sometimes further afield, to show different kinds of technology, also different kinds of theatre, and things for kids. Allen Ginsberg came one year and was a real trooper. And trooper, that's a funny expression.
Trooper, someone who works really hard and does their part. Someone who kind
Yes,
of like,
he
pulls their weight and works hard and contributes a lot.
he stood in for. I think he said, "I'll do that," because there was someone that couldn't appear in one of the domes one afternoon, and there was some teenage kids there who'd been expecting a conjurer, I think, and he went and read to them. And it was a rainy day, and the wind was blowing, and the Melanex on the dome was fluttering about. And Allen Ginsberg read from Howl, his poem, and they were a bit heckly at the beginning, the kids, but they calmed down and were really entranced. He was really good with them.
Allen
Yeah,
Ginsberg, listeners, viewers, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but a very influential figure, I guess, of the 1950s beat movement and the
yeah,
1960s as
yes,
well.
that's
A
right.
sort of a pivotal figure in what became known as the counterculture. Some people
Yes,
call it hippie culture, but as you said, it was kind of like broader than that, encompassed more things than that. But yes, he was a poet who had a sort of stream of consciousness style,
yes,
and as a cultural figure, he's a big name in this whole movement.
yeah.
So that's impressive that Ginsberg actually came. That must have
Yeah,
been
this
a
is,
big
I mean,
deal.
I'm flagging up these names that are well known, but I mean, there were also the breadth of the program in these festivals was huge. There was we had a hub of each summer. I think there were probably 5 or 6 in a row. We had like a central office that would be like organizing everything. I guess other festivals do this, but we had radio telephones one year borrowed from Civil Aid, which which was a sort of Civil Aid was a thing where in Britain you had volunteers who were ready if there was an earthquake or something to come and help. So they had equipment, and they let us borrow real radio telephones, which before mobiles was the only way you could talk from a van to an office and say, I'm going to this site now, and I'm going to deliver all the tables for this event, and then I'm
Mm,
coming back
mm.
and taking the PA to somewhere else. And so it was a really complex bit of organization, but lots of local people became involved who wouldn't normally get involved in this kind of thing. So there were lots of kids involved and events for older people. And yeah, it's just such a complex stack of, and I think that was what was unique about the workshop, was that we organized festivals and arts events and stuff like that, and toured our own theatre, but also had a day-to-day activity, which was running a shop that sold secondhand clothes and furniture, did removals for people. We organized a Christmas dinner every year for 200 people that wouldn't have a Christmas otherwise.
Yeah.
I ran an adventure playground. So there were, I think the unique thing about it that I got was that I found really interesting and hard to actually leave when I went away to do my full-time art college thing, was doing so many different jobs in one day. So I think that was what was unique about it. There were plenty of people conventionally organising theatre or community work or social events and stuff, but the workshop, in any one day you might be doing a house removal in the morning, helping someone, or moving a piano, or doing something like that. And then in the afternoon you might be making costumes or working in the shop. And then in the evening you might be doing a rehearsal or driving to another city to do a gig the next day. And then you'd come back the next day and be doing office work, sorting out the admin. So it was incredible lot of multitasking, but
Yeah.
with a lot of camaraderie and humor always. There was an awful lot of laughing and jokes and stuff going on as well.
It's almost like a sort of a combination between, as well as the music performances and things, the gigs that you were organizing, and artistic events, but also like charitable volunteering in the community
Yeah.
and things like that. It's a wide variety of different things. So more practical sort of things like helping people out, as you said, like, well, you said moving pianos, but that might have been for the musical
Yeah,
performances.
yeah.
But I guess, like, yeah, it's hard to summarize, isn't it? This thing. It seems like quite a large and complex organism that was
Yes.
involved in many different things. But what was the sort of central? You may have mentioned this already, but
No,
what was the kind of central principle or aim of this? Because it seems it can seem like a bit of a chaotic kind of thing
Yes.
where all these people are doing these things, and listeners and viewers might be thinking it's all a bit vague and a bit sort of nebulous. Like what's
Yes, I
what's
know.
the point?
I know.
You know,
I think yes, I
I
could
don't
do.
mean to.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right to push it. What was the point? I think the point was to try and change. I think the ethos that Phil brought from Drury Lane Arts Lab. I think what he was after, because he did kind of focus the group a lot, and I think the idea was to have an open organization that anyone really could join in with if they were willing to. So it was potentially chaotic, but somehow it wasn't. It was quite a strong central hub for arts and community. So it was called community arts, the whole thing. And I think if it had, one thing was premises. We had a really good premises for a while that was a rehearsal space and a place you could, cook
Live.
and have an office and everything. But after a while, we had to move out of there because of the neighbours. It was a bit noisy having evening shows next to these little houses down a side road. So then we had a shop with an office above it, but had to hire places to do events or do outside events. So there was always a hub and an office planning things. And we had tons of meetings, quite tightly organised meetings saying what's going to happen this week. We've got the, theatre touring. We've got these music events. People need to work on the adventure playground, the allotment, the removals, the Christmas dinner. All of it came together under one roof effectively. And the motivation was just to make art and fun and joining in available to more people than would normally contact it. But it was a strange...
In some ways, it reminds me of some things that you get today, like certain like music festivals. If you think of Glastonbury and things like that, the things that go on there and the general spirit, the mood of the event is this very inclusive thing where people can do interesting, inspiring activities that everyone's involved and stuff. But these days, when you think of music festivals and things, still the bottom line is still kind of about making a profit. That a lot of these things are business ventures ultimately, that they've got great sort of they involve great activities and things, but the profit is the bottom line in many cases. It's hard to find any kind of organized movement that isn't ultimately about making some money. But I get the impression the Bath Arts Workshop was not the bottom line, that it was actually about, as you say, creating a sort of a space in which people could express themselves and in which that was democratic, that would be somehow healthy for the general culture. Right.
Yeah, no, you've done well there. That's good.
All right. Good. Yeah. Wow.
A good summing up, because it can sound a bit and like it can sound chaotic. And I mean, I found the music part the bit that I was most intrigued by myself, and the the graphic arts, because I ended up being an illustrator, but I spent a lot of time designing posters and brochures and things like that. But there was room for everybody to use their skills that they had. Some were absolute brilliant comedians. Some, like Phil, I've mentioned, was an incredible organizer of people and inspiring, but without being a big head at all. He's a very modest bloke, but very good at kind of summing up better than I am at what the ethos was. And then there were incredible actors within it. Ralph Oswick, who played the manager in Rocky Ricketts, and Brian Poppe and Jackie Poppe as well. Really brilliant actors. And then other people who were technologists. So there was Thornton and Glyn and Rick Knapp, who started to evolve salvage and reuse of building materials, making domes, making windmills, what else? Solar panels and stuff like that. And they're all still involved in that kind of work now. But this was knitted together by regular meetings and trying to get premises together and stuff to make these things work and make them just viable. It wasn't to make money. It was to make it happen. So that was the difference. The financial side was always a bit precarious. But after a while, the reputation we had for bringing theatre together from all over the country and for organising the technology events and stuff like that meant that we attracted some funding from the Arts Council, which kept the theatre company going and paid for the building and stuff. And we got, checked by the Arts Council quite often. All the accounts had to be proper and everything. We made some money from gigs. We made some money from selling secondhand furniture and clothes. And we got a lot of the props from the clothes in the shop. I think I'm right in saying that some of the most useful characters we had for expressing, anything almost, were these characters called the normals. We got some dinner suits into the shop, and the normals wore black dinner suits, girls and boys, black turtleneck sweaters, bowler hats, which are those hats you see in Britain in the city. I don't know if anyone wears them anymore.
The classic sort of gentleman's bowler hat.
Yeah. I've got a picture of a normal here for anyone that's watching the video.
There's a picture of a normal.
There are some normals you see with a traffic warden.
Two
normals.
Look kind of weird.
Kind of sinister. And they wore white gloves and then very glittery silver masks over their faces. So they were kind of anonymous looking, and they moved in formation, usually 3 or 4 of them in a row, and were quite silent. They never spoke, but they could do anything from sort of massaging a car, saying, "Aren't cars marvellous?" And then they'd snap to attention and march off. And often we'd do normals in shopping precincts and things like that. And they'd gather round someone with a big bag of shopping and just clap like that round the person, and then do a namaste and then march off. Or they do something quite, like posing round a statue. Anyway, they were very funny and very useful characters. And if you did them in a kid's play scheme or something, you get kicked a lot if you were doing a normal thing.
Because the kids would kick them. It sort of, again, reminds me of some things you might see today, like, sort of stuff that happens where you get these random bits of performance in the street.
Yes.
So in those, when you were doing it, it was like a brand new idea that hadn't really been done before.
Street theatre was a newer thing. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes, if you go to
kind of everywhere a little bit now, where there's like a flash mob or something along those lines.
Coloured statues, people all dressed in blue, being very still.
Well, those street performers. But no, I mean, other types of unexpected street performance. I mean, wasn't there one that happened in London a couple of, when was it, 15 years ago or something, that suddenly one day on Oxford Street there were all these performers that suddenly turned up, and they had a big mechanical elephant that walked down the street or something?
Yes,
do you remember that?
I do.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Something about that, yes. I think
I
so,
can't remember
yeah.
who that was, but that would have been some other group that specialized in doing those sorts of things. But yeah, this is the sort of thing we're talking about. But you were kind of doing it.
We were
Back
doing that.
in the
I
70s.
guess it was fairly new, but the other groups that used to come to Bath for the festivals, sometimes there'd be like, I don't know, 50, maybe that's too many, but 25, I don't know. Lots of theatre groups would come and all visit the city during the summer while we had our festival. So you'd see things popping up everywhere, like you do now in Edinburgh or at a pop festival where there's lots of street performance. But
Yeah.
there'd be all sorts of people doing things, and you'd think, is that real? Is that a real thing or not? But it meant that, the theatre was right there in front of people. So it was the beginning of all of that. But overall, the organisation was quite tight. But I think what made people like me have to leave in the end was that it was just, I really wanted to do art at art college, and I mean, I loved being there, and I could easily have stayed there forever if I hadn't really wanted to go to art college. But there just wasn't time to do drawing and painting and stuff like that because it was very all-consuming and busy. But brilliant fun.
Maybe just sort of as we get to the end of this part of the conversation, maybe we can talk a little bit about impact, either like impact that this had on culture in general, or just impact that it had on you personally. What about the impact of the Bath Arts Workshop?
Well, I think legacy is the word now, isn't it?
Legacy, yes, of
Legacy.
course.
There's a good word.
Yeah,
Yes.
legacy. The
Yeah.
the impact that something has over time, the way it builds a kind of story that continues on. People talk about personal legacy, which is like, oh God, thinking of a good example. That when someone who is a public figure, for example, might decide that they want to leave a certain legacy, which is like a
Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you're. Yes.
legacy would be like what the impact that is left, the imprint that something has on culture over time. So so if we talk about the legacy of the Beatles, I mean, I always use the Beatles as my example
Yeah.
because it's
Yes.
kind of easy to use them as an example for most things. But the legacy of the Beatles is that they left us with this story, and they left us with these songs that will kind of last for a long time, that will continue through time. This is what we mean by the legacy. So the legacy of the Bath Arts Workshop, it came to an end at the end of the 70s, right? Officially, kind of
Yes,
thing.
officially. But there were strands that were not broken. So I think, I mean, in fact, I'm just going to reach for something.
Okay. Wisely removing the headphones before you reach.
I actually wrote my college thesis because after Bath Arts Workshop, I left in 1974. And in fact, Phil, who founded it, really left in 1974 and went to work in the arts in London for a while and went to South America because he wanted to be there for various reasons. I went to art college and wrote a thesis at the end of my fine art course, and this is the cover of it, so you can just see it's a kind of a montage of all the things the workshop did. There's a couple of rockets in the centre there.
So you did a thesis about the
So I wrote all about it and the sort of conclusion of what the legacy and what was the lasting impact of it. And I think what happened, there was a bit of a crossroads because the workshop was trying to find a premises where this kind of the ethos and the work could continue, but with a better base. So there was a building down the road that we wanted to take over. The council weren't keen. In the end, we didn't get permission to do it, but that would have been a constant arts hub with, rehearsal space. There are places like this now where the workshop could have been based and opened itself out much more to the local community because we would have had more space, physical space. But what did last were all sorts of basically everyone had to specialize in the end. So I think it was the complexity and running it as all these things together was difficult. But the theatre company itself, called Natural Theatre, was named after a cider called Natural Dry, by the way, not like natural. So anyway, small
Nice,
note.
nice to name it after a cider. Good idea.
Local Somerset cider. So the Natural Theatre Company survives to this day and is in fact thriving. Is still doing street theatre and specialises in that kind of thing rather than indoor shows like I talked about at the beginning. The alternative technology or the community technology founded all kinds of things. Thornton, who was involved in that, now runs Salvo, which is a big building materials reuse thing that goes right through Europe. And Glyn is still doing architectural projects that, I mean, lots of people are doing what they did best in the workshop. So,
yeah, so the workshop almost was sort of a great way to learn skills, and everyone kind of
yes.
learnt all these things and then went off and applied them in different ways, including you. So did you learn about illustration during this time? I mean, how did this then set you up? How did this set you up for your career as an illustrator then?
Well, I think I was always, drawing as a kid and stuff, and liked to draw, and had got a place on a foundation course when I met the workshop. So I did, I took A-level art twice. I took it early. I got a D twice. My brother got an A. So I ended up.
Wait, you took it once. You studied for like 2 years.
Yes.
And you got a D, and then you're like, "Damn, I'm going to do it again."
Yes, the teacher
and then you
said,
got another D.
"Oh, she's good at drawing. Put her in early." So I did it early and got a D, and then I got it again. So it must have been something I needed to learn still. Anyway, so I did that, and then when I was with the workshop, I was drawing all the time. And again, people won't be able to see this if they're just listening, but this is a picture I did of what one of the festivals would look like on the back of a brochure, and you could see there's Georgian houses there in a row, and a dome, and a puppet show, and a bus, and lots of people. It looks a bit like a Where's Wally scene, I could say, in black and white.
Yes.
So that was
Where's
something
Penny,
I
maybe?
did. And then this, because I grew up with a lot of my father collected old magazines and stuff, like old Strand magazines and Punch, and had loads of copies of the New Yorker he used to get from a friend. So I saw a lot of cartoons when I was growing up. And this was an invitation to one of the workshop Christmas dinners, which is a sort of pastiche or homage to Punch. And it's a Victorian kind of image.
Yeah, it's the
sort of black
sort
and
of
white
thing
again.
in those very old Sherlock Holmes books that have bits of artwork in them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's that kind of style.
Very much so, yes. You see
Yeah, I
that
see. So,
Punch character there holding a giant Christmas pudding.
okay,
So yes, so that's another, and then just finally, this is the other thing. There was a brochure in Bath at the time that looked very much like this. Sorry about the holes down the side. So this is a picture of the Royal Crescent in Bath, or half of it, and on the actual Bath City guide, it had a perfect picture of the Royal Crescent like that on the back as well. But this was a little brochure about the workshop. It shows the kids there in the play scheme and other bits and pieces. But on the back of this brochure that I did is the Royal Crescent with a motorway coming through it, with lots of cranes and wrecking balls and bulldozers and stuff. And this was just a comment. At the time, quite a bit of Bath was being knocked down before people realised how important a lot of the architecture was. So the Royal Crescent didn't actually ever have a motorway come through it, but that was just.
yeah,
So obviously I was sort of, flexing the drawing thing a bit. And in fact, I took a whole gap year before I went and did my degree. I took a year out to work with a workshop full time. So I did my foundation course after the first summer working with them, and did things in the evening and in holidays. And then I had a whole year full time and ended up learning how to do electrics and lighting and I liked all the techie stuff of setting up gigs and music events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a fantastic project, and something that was, about just having ideas and being creative and just so many different things happening all at the same time, and not just all about making money, but with other higher minded ideas in place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Do you think that
think
sort of thing could happen today?
I don't know. I mean, we've been talking about that because the nice thing about writing a book about all of this is that we've all realized what were the strengths and what were the difficulties with it. But I mean, all of us learnt about collaboration in a way that we can't imagine. I mean, you do that in all kinds of job settings, but you wouldn't find yourself stepping sideways to such a huge extent as in that environment where you would find yourself doing, you know, like
Yeah.
digging an allotment one day, or digging in an electric cable, or starting up a generator, or all kinds of things. I never would have thought. Now and again, I had to say I'll do that because nobody else had said it. So you found yourself doing things, and with a responsibility, because it was a real event and you couldn't not do it, to actually get it right and learn it. So I think all of us took away from the workshop that kind of a wider collaborative sense or experience than we would have got from a more specialized environment or job. And now we were saying, when we were just talking about doing the book, that it was much easier for us then. Our rents were like nothing. We could rent big flats, big Georgian flats with great big windows and stuff for a quarter of our meager wages. We earned about £12 a week, I think, which was probably the equivalent of 250 now or something, maybe not that much. It wasn't much. And half of that was food, and a quarter was bills, and a quarter was rent. And we could manage on that. So, nowadays it would be, young people can't even afford rent quite often and have to live with their folks, or save and save. It's crazy. And we also could get grants and support to do what we were doing. So it's much harder now, but in fact there's much more of a need, in a way, for people to find some alternative ways to counter what's going on, because it's a very difficult time for
It is.
the planet and for social life and stuff, and very hard, to make enough to actually just live in a reasonable way, for loads of people. So, maybe it's time that, we all got back together again and did more than just write a book about it. I don't know.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Penny, thank you for talking to us all about it. And the book's called Bath Arts Workshop, Counterculture in the 1970s.
I'll show
Available
the cover.
from all good bookshops.
Good bookshops.
And bad ones too, probably, we hope.
Yes.
And there it is. You can see it on the screen, ladies and gents.
There we are.
Lovely. Now,
Okay.
that's kind of the end of part one then. And what we'll do now is talk about writing and illustrating children's books. Okay,
Yes,
so that's going to be in part two. So we're now going to stop part one. And
say
viewers,
bye for
listeners, you can find part two. I don't know where it'll be. I don't know if it's uploaded yet, but have a look. You might find it. Otherwise, it'll be the next thing to be uploaded onto this podcast. But Penny, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. It was great fun. I enjoyed it. I'm not sure if it made any sense, but
well, we'll see.
We'll
see what people say.
Okay, right.
All right. So, right, that's the end of that.
Bye.
Stop. I don't know. What do you do? How do you stop? You don't do that. That's how you start action in movies, right?
Yeah,
You have a clapperboard. You don't do that at the end. Cut. That's it.
Yeah, cut.
Cut.
You don't do that.
No, not that
No,
one.
that means
but
shut up. Wind it up.
Yeah, and then, okay, cut.